Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. This is an ad-free show and donations are greatly appreciated. To learn more and make a contribution, go to authenticparenting.com/support. Thank you for your generous and kind support. It means the world to me. I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the generational cycle of trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, the 5 R's of parenting. I'm speaking with Dr. Eliza Pressman. She's a developmental psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience working with families and the healthcare providers who care for them. Eliza is an assistant clinical professor in the Division of Behavioral Health Department of Pediatrics at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital, where she is co-founding director of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center. She is also a fellow podcaster. Her show is called Raising Good Humans, and I am assuming that some of you may know her podcast. She is also a mother of 2 teenagers. Her book is coming up soon, and it's called The 5 Principles of Parenting, Your Essential Guide to Raising Good Humans. In today's conversation, she provided an overview of the 5 caregiving principles: relationship, reflection, regulation, rules, and repair. Relationship is the presence of a nurturing relationship with at least one supporting stable adult. Reflection is the space for mindfulness and micro-meditation in the spaces between the busy moment. Regulation is staying intentional without letting emotions unnecessarily react into fight or flight. Rules are an important part of parenting. They help your children feel safe. And the last one is repair, the spontaneous and intentional processes we use to mend our relationships. I particularly enjoyed the part about repairs. I know it can be hard for parents, and I hope what she shared will be helpful. We also talked about her 7-step framework called balance. Each letter stands for a concept, and she shared a really relatable analogy to help you understand self-regulation, which I really loved. I thought it was brilliant. I really enjoyed having Eliza on the show, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. Well, Eliza, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you first about the 5 R's of parenting. What are the 5 R's, if you could give a brief description for each R?
Sure. So I basically wanted to figure out, what do we really need to know from the science of child development and human development? And so I didn't come up with any of these. I just kind of I just chose the sort of R's that mattered. Relationship, reflection, regulation, rules, and repair. And I can briefly go into them, but essentially I wanted to think of what are the parts of this science that we know over time and across cultures and across different personalities and age spans and values, what still translates in the science that has an impact on child outcomes and what is also in our control as parents. And so that's where that comes from. And so relationship is just what it sounds like. It's our connection, our attunement, our attachment relationship with our children. And from that, we can really protect them from the toxic stressors that potentially are around. And that's very different than the normal everyday stressors that are positive, but it is protective for those who are experiencing high doses of stress. and it matters. So I wanted to make sure that that was the first of the 5 R's, that relationship is the most powerful protective factor that we have an impact on. And then reflection, I think if you have time to breathe, you have time to reflect, and it allows for us to be able to let go of all of the parts of our history that might be interrupting our choices that we would make as parents, because we have all this noise in our head about what that meant for us in the past, what this means for the future. And when you reflect, you can really be present. So when we talk about presence with our kids, I wanted to make sure that I focused a lot on the habit of reflection, both for ourselves and also modeling it for our kids. And then regulation, self-regulation and co-regulation gives us that choice and that freedom to make decisions that are not autopilot, that are part of a nervous system that is not on high alert. So distinguishing between real and imagined threats so that we can really be present, make good choices, and then help our kids co-regulate because they need to borrow our nervous system so often as they're developing. And then rules. So rules don't really work without relationship, but in the context of a close relationship, rules are so foundational to safety and support. And sometimes we're really good at relationship, but we're not so good at rules. And sometimes it's the reverse. So I think of rules as both boundaries between ourselves and others, and the expectations and limits that we set for our kids, and helping parents understand that our kids don't have to like those things, that they might even have hard feelings because of them. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a close relationship and still piss off our kids, because we have to help them have these parameters. And finally, repair, which we know in the science is so key to healthy relationships. And I think it gives all parents the relief of knowing that is actually a pathway for growth and a pathway for a stronger relationship when you have ruptures and you make repairs, so that we don't feel like we have to get this right all the time. That's it.
Well, you covered basically everything that is important to parenting, right?
That's what I was kind of hoping. Like, we made this so complicated and we've made this so intense, but actually, if you can kind of grab onto those 5 principles of parenting, you've got it covered.
Yeah. And of course, everybody has their own struggles. Some people may be good at just doing the relationship and have difficulties with the repair and the rules, and vice versa, right? Then we go into the territory of, and you write about this in your book, about the parenting styles, right? And I mean, the listeners of my podcast and your podcast are more conscious parents, people who are doing this work, gentle, positive parenting. So we're aligned here. We're not convincing people to come.
We're not selling something new. Yeah.
We're not selling something new. So, and some of these ideas resonate with our listeners. Before we get deeper into couple of the R's, I want to ask you about the BALANCE acronym. The BALANCE, I don't know what you call it, the formula or the mantra.
Well, I was thinking about it, and people always say, like, how do I deal with this challenge, or how do I deal with that challenge? And so in this book, I was like, you know what? The truth is, whether you have a toddler or a teenager, you go through the same steps, you just translate it differently. And so in the first part of the book, when I'm kind of talking about the big picture, the forest through the trees of the science of it all, I give this acronym BALANCE. And then in the second half, when it's kind of, I call it from page to stage because I'm a theater geek, but it's like translating this into our everyday experiences. I give more specific ways, but it's still like going through the same steps, kind of 7 steps. And so the first thing to do, which is annoying, I know, but we all know we have to do it, is breathe, because you got to do the deep through the nose, exhale through the mouth, because unless you're in danger, your child's actually in danger, we have time to take a breath before we make any of the decisions. There's rich neuroscience behind it, and we'll always feel better about whatever our parenting choice was if we took a breath. So that's the first B of balance. And then A is acknowledge. Just acknowledge, what is this moment bringing up for me? What's the baggage from, days past, years past, so that you can figure out like what you need to respond to right now and what you can let go of. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to unpack the baggage later. It just means that right now, this is not what this moment is about. So if you were upset with your 15-year-old for, not listening to you about giving you the phone or sneaking the phone, and you turn it into, this means they're never going to listen. And if I start with this, the next thing you know, they're hiding drugs. You're dealing with stuff that is not at all related to that moment, and it will feel more heightened and feel more urgent. And then you go into these stress responses you don't need to. So I always like to acknowledge, which is that's the reflection, and then let go. And then you can assess what's happening right in that moment and gauge what you need and what your child needs. What's everybody's state of mind, and how can I make a path forward? And then the N is notice. And noticing is just observing what's going on in your own body and your child's body, because we so often do a lot of thinking up, neck up, and there are so many clues in what's going on in our bodies. And when we, again, pay attention to that, we can see what our kids need. If their cheeks are red and their hands are clenched, then they probably need support for their nervous system, not a verbal lesson in what's going on. And so then once you've noticed that, it's the next letter is C for connect. We have to connect to our kids. That's how we have this relationship. And we can let our kids know either verbally, or maybe it's through our body language, that we see them and that we know that they're going through something. And even if we're about to set a limit or have a consequence that's natural or logical, we first taken that moment to connect and understand them, so that then we can do the last part, which is E, engage, and make that decision. Like, okay, what do we need to do now? Is this the kind of thing where I am fully present, my child's tended to emotionally, now it's time for me to decide, how am I moving forward with this? And that's when I think we can make the decisions that aren't like, oh my God, why did I just scream at my child and take away the TV for the rest of their lives? When really I just meant, hey, you didn't respect what I set up with the phone, so I'm just going to take it for now and we'll figure out the rest later. And that just de-escalates so much of the nonsense.
Can I ask you to apply this maybe to concrete examples for the listener so that it's very helpful for the listener? We can use an example of a preschooler, maybe another one, teenage years, and maybe middle childhood. How could this be applied in a specific situation? With a teenager, you already sort of mentioned with the phone.
Yeah, that was a teenager. But let's go back to earlier.
Yes, let's go to earlier. What are some challenging things parents face these days with their little kids?
I'm just looking for example in the book. I was just trying to find an example, because I do try to go do this for each age with each example. But let's just go to the basics of a tantrum over, not getting the color cup you wanted at the table. Something simple. And your child is like freaking out. Okay, so they're not going to get hurt if you just take the breath. So you breathe. And then you ask yourself, like, why am I going crazy right now? Am I embarrassed because my mother-in-law is here? Am I worried about how she's feeling? Am I thinking that this is a sign that if I don't step in right now, my child's going to become a tyrant? Or is it the opposite? Am I worried I have to make sure that my child isn't having a hard feeling because I get really personally upset at the sense that something could possibly be uncomfortable for my child? Okay, now I can let that go, because I'm going to focus on what's going on right now. They just really wanted the blue cup and I gave them the red cup. So now I can acknowledge what's going on for them. And I can say, okay, they just really felt like they didn't have a choice and they didn't have a say and they wanted a say. So I'm going to notice what's going on in their body. Are they arching their back? Are they screaming? Are they frozen? Are they demanding? Like, what is happening? And can I soften that intensity with my own nervous system? Do they need me to touch their back? Do they need me to just be quiet and just wait and observe what's going on? And then connect. So that's where you might say to the toddler, you really want that blue cup and I gave you a red cup, or I can't remember if it's the reverse, and I gave you a red cup and that's so disappointing. Let's set aside the blue cup for dinner and you'll have it then. And so are they going to be happy? Probably not. They'll probably be pissed off because you're not giving them the cup that they wanted, but you're acknowledging their feelings. So you've done the part that is about the connection. Then you can wait and decide, am I going to sit this out? Am I going to swap the cups? Am I going to say, let's take a little walk around and calm down before we sit at the table? Let's do a little dance, shake our hands. Let's have a sip of water. I mean, a number of things, but you can't really get to that place to help your child regulate if you haven't gone through the steps. And they're so quick, it doesn't take long. It's more just, it's the work you have to do. It takes sometimes seconds, but it helps you share your nervous system because they are obviously not able to just be like, oh yes, I need to take a few deep breaths and then I'll be calm again. And then it happens over and over. So you get many opportunities to have these interactions. And as you do that, you're growing your children's self-regulatory muscles and your own, and it becomes more fluent and easier. So I have a shorthand for it, which is just BAD, breathe, assess, and then probably decide how to move forward. But I should probably confirm that in my book. But that's the short version, is you just are okay, I definitely don't have time for the 7 steps. I'm just going to breathe. I'm assessing what's happening. And now I can decide how to move forward. That's for when you're exhausted. And then, so that's a young version. We have the teen version.
So may I ask you then, what if the parent is not finding themselves in this connected, regulated space? Because your child may say, "You're mean, mommy. I don't like you." And you're doing the steps, and now it's a new curveball, right? And you take it personally. What could you say to that parent? How can this parent reorient and stay on course and continue with this?
I think it's just a quick hand on heart and a reminder. Nobody is under attack. Nobody is threatened. It feels really crappy. And what my child is doing is just expressing how crappy they feel. And the way they know how to do it is to put it on me. And my job isn't to take this personally. It's to help them learn how to regulate their own nervous system. And they need me to meet them where I am, not meet them where they are. If you meet them up where they are in this dysregulated state, it's like imagining a tornado getting bigger because it's met by a tornado. So I think those are the parents that it's the same thing. You reflect, why is this setting me off? Why am I taking this personally? Maybe what you're hearing is you're a bad parent, and that makes you infuriated because you feel ashamed and worried and all that stuff. So it's always coming back to, when those moments happen, find your breath again. Your brain cannot have a stress response, and you will not yell at your kid or lash out at yourself when you breathe, because it's an opposing signal to threat. Breathing a deep breath in and out is a very clear indicator to your body that you are not being chased by a tiger. And so I think that's the work, and we practice, and then we're going to fail at it, and we're going to snap, or we're going to just give them the cup that they wanted and be like, to hell with it. I need my life to be easier. And then you'll make repairs and move on and try again the next time.
I think when it comes to toddlers, what I notice, parents take things so seriously. I think when it comes to toddlers, you have to have this light attitude when they say something. When you serve the wrong shape of pasta, you cut the banana wrong, or you tear the bread wrong. I had some parents said, my child said, "Can you cut me bread?" And mom cut it, and he just had a meltdown because that's not how you're supposed to cut. I think parents respond so seriously to those toddler emotions and, responses. They justify, they say, "No, I didn't. You asked to cut the bread. I cut the bread. You did this." It's like adult to adult. But if we can just keep a light attitude and have a playful emotional response, always be surprised. I feel like this, "Oh my goodness, is not what you expected," right? Coming from this emotional space, it de-escalates so much of the unnecessary stuff between parent and toddler. Toddlers especially is so easy, but it's very challenging for a lot of parents, because they take it so seriously.
They take it so seriously. And I think that's why, if you just commit to that reflective moment, you can remind yourself, this is just part of like the deal. And it's kind of cute and funny because these are cute and funny people, but they don't feel like it's cute and funny. But you're so much better off just being like, oh, wait, they don't not like me. They just don't like what I'm saying right now. So it's just, if you have the moment to just remind yourself that this is all part of their very new way of expressing themselves, it just doesn't feel as heavy. And I think it's the same with older kids too. Like when they're really at their most vicious, it's not because they actually are disrespectful, nasty people. It's because they're dysregulated and they want someone to lash out at, and they know that you love them, so they can probably get away with it with you. And if you meet them with, don't talk to me like that, that is unacceptable, and anger, you're going to just get more pushback. But if you say like, I think I'm going to let you have a little moment because that was unpleasant, or do you want to say that again? Like something that's sort of like, I'm not going to be deeply moved by your lashing out because I know that it's not about that. It just like de-escalates everything. And then, you can always come back to connection. Like if you are fighting, if you're not on the same team, if you're like proving I'm not going to allow this, then it seems like you're not on the same team. But if you're on the same team, it's because it's team this child growing up. That's it. And it does keep it quite a bit lighter. I mean, most things could be solved if we just put it in perspective in that moment for ourselves. But I'm not saying to do that for the kids, because for them, it is important and big. It's just like, it doesn't need to grow that big for us.
Yeah. So let's deconstruct an example for a kid who is maybe like 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah, let's use an example that's like not a tantrum, but maybe they get into the car, we pick them up from school, they get into the car and they say, everybody hates me, or something that's just sucks. And so again, you want to breathe and remind yourself, this is a moment I can handle. I'm not under attack. And then figuring out what they said, that maybe hearing that makes you have a flood of memories from your elementary school experience, and just like how awful that was, and how you would desperately want to fix their experience right now so that they don't have to feel those feelings. But then you remind yourself, that's my baggage and I am going to put that aside and I'm just going to hear what they said. It's about them. And then again, you can let go and get into acknowledging what's going on for them, and, wanting to make sure that you notice, how is their body? Did they get in the car folding their arms and breathing heavily? Or did they get into the car with like watery eyes and they're feeling sort of sad? What is happening for them? And again, all of these things that you notice, and you notice your body, you can do the things that you need to do, lower your shoulders, take your breath, and connect with your child to give them what they need. And connecting means probably saying something like, that sounds so hard. Tell me about that. Tell me what that means. Instead of, everybody doesn't hate you, and denying their experience because it makes you feel a little bit better. And just allowing it to happen, allowing it to unfold. And then again, you can engage and figure out, how are we going to solve this? Do you want my advice, or do you want me to just listen and I'll just be here? And you can determine that with your child, because now they're a little bit older and you can figure out what they need. Maybe what they need is, I just needed to vent. I just needed to vent. I don't really feel like everybody hates me. Or maybe they need you to help them make new friends. But none of those things can happen if you are flooded with your own memories of your childhood, or if you're freaking out that this hard feeling is forever, or if you need to fix everything they go through because you don't trust that they'll be okay having the range of feelings that people have. And I think, that stuff comes at us daily.
Yeah, it becomes very hard. Is there another way you could help the parent to sort of parse what's mine, what's my child's? Is there another way, a question maybe, or an exercise? I think that's because that's the turning point, right? We just become merged and flooded with memories and emotions and things like that. And we take it personally, catastrophize, we want to solve it. And it just becomes a completely different issue. I like how you say acknowledge what's happening for your child, watch their body, watch what's happening for you. I want you to emphasize these points a little more, because for this to happen, you need to slow down a little bit.
Everything is slower.
Slow-mo, slow-mo.
But I think what's great about slow-mo is recognizing like you would not be doing that. None of us would be saying this if there was a real threat to safety. An exercise I love to do is, so when I moved to California, I moved into a house in the canyons, and I was used to living in New York City. So for me, New York City is like way safer, which sounds ridiculous, but in an apartment building, I just felt like there are people around. So I got an alarm system for the first time, and I walked into my house, and there's like a space when you have an alarm system of like slow beeping, beep, beep, beep. And it's like the warning that you have to punch in the passcode or the alarm is going to go off and the police will come and the fire trucks and whatever. And in that moment, I was like, oh, that's the moment that we have to remind ourselves there is no emergency. I can take the time to get myself regulated, to punch in my passcode so that I can actually be there for my child and not treat it like there needs to be the firemen and the police and the ambulances. They're just having a feeling, and a feeling is not dangerous and it's not an emergency. So I think the exercise is like, what is your passcode? For me, I have like a little thing I say to myself. I put my hand on my heart and I take 2 deep breaths in and 2 deep breaths out. And like, that's enough to punch in my passcode. Someone else might need to have a drink of water. Like, that's just the thing that like reminds them they are okay and safe. Whatever your thing is, that's the exercise to practice daily, because that passcode is your key to responding with these intentional, mindful, conscious ways versus these reactive, totally panicked ways, because we're like, oh my God, this is a feeling and they can't have this hard feeling. And that's just a way that we just need to keep practicing until it becomes embodied.
I love this. This is brilliant and very relatable. And it's a nice visual too. Everybody can relate to this, because you hear always people say it's not an emergency, right? But now it's more concrete. Punch in the pass. It's very concrete. So I love this. Thank you for this. I want to ask you about, feelings. You said it's like, why do we always feel like we need to respond to every feeling right away, right? Can we just let the feeling exist, just be for just a little bit, right? And with older kids, even with younger kids, is a bit of a different story. I think with older kids, it is really totally okay. And even I highly encourage parents to let their children be and stew a little bit in their feelings, to develop some kind of self-awareness, some capacity, can I handle this? What's going on for me? As opposed to us jumping in right away and like it takes a different turn and the child has no opportunity to learn anything about their internal world. So I want you to speak about this. Again, with ages. Let's start with the toddlers and go up.
So I think, and I appreciate doing it that way, because that is how I do this in the book, because I agree that like, even though they're the same ideas, you need concrete ways of translating it by the ages. And I do think part of this is the reflection of, how do feelings impact me? If you had the message as a child that your feelings when they were really challenging were dangerous, and your parents were like, oh my God, you're sad, I have to fix this. The message is, sad must be something that I'm not supposed to feel. And so with a little child even, no, we don't want them to just be sad all the time. But when they're having the sad feeling, we don't need to chase a toddler around to make the feeling go away. We can sit in a more like, we can let them spin around and have our bodies available for hugs. We're sitting there, but we don't need to say like, okay, I'll cut the banana this way. What about this way? What about that? And chasing them down to try to get them to be happy. So that's little ones. It's more like an acceptance. My child is having a hard time. They are freaking out. I am going to keep my body safe, and I'm going to keep my body showing them that I am not worried that this is an emergency. And over time, they're going to realize it's not an emergency. And they might even come to you for a hug and then a calm, and then they move along. As they get older, when they're having these feelings, whether it's anger or sadness or whatever, it's a matter of noticing it, acknowledging it, but not saying, what can we do about this? We don't have to do anything about it until they want to. They might say like, I need help. And then of course you're there to help, but letting them know, I believe this is hard. And also I know that this is going to be temporary and I'm right here with you is more impactful in the long run than saying like, let's say your school-age child didn't get invited to a party and they're so upset and you don't want them to be that upset. So you go and call the other parent and you say, listen, my kid's so upset. Send an email inviting them right now. Please, they were left out. So now the child is like, oh, good, I'm happy again. And the parent feels soothed, like I saved the day. But in the long run, that child didn't learn. That stinks to have that sense that you're not invited and included. And I'm sorry about that. And also, this is something that happens and I know you can handle it. It's a bummer, but I'm not worried that you can't handle it. And I think that grows over time with teenagers. Mostly we have to zip it and just let them feel their feels. But the key is, I think, between letting feelings happen and deserting kids in the feeling is like, when possible, showing them you can handle it and it's not too hard for you and you don't need to walk away and you don't need, unless they want you to, and you don't need to be so empathetic that you're feeling it alongside them. Like if your teenager just had a terrible breakup and they're heartbroken, it's their first heartbreak. If you start crying because you're so upset that they're so upset, they're not likely going to feel like you can handle it when they come to you with sad feelings. It's about them. Let them have their hard feelings and you look at them and say, I am here with you. But you're not like so dysregulated yourself because they're suffering that you can't manage to hear about their hard times. Did that answer that?
Yes, it did. I mean, this is such a rich topic. Like we can open up to different emotions, anger and things like that. But I think the key is, again, like I'm hearing, is just separating our feelings from theirs, our problems from theirs. It's just that separation between me and you, that boundary, right? That's the key. Because the moment we merge, take personally, then it's going to derail and escalate. And of course, we want to raise resilient kids, right? And how are they going to develop resiliency? It's through their life's experiences. If we jump in and save and rescue and email the mom and say, send an email to my kid, invite my kid and fix all the situations, then, our children we already live in a privileged, good society. There is a lot of things for our kids. There's food. Most of the time, children have a lot of things. And if we artificially solve all those minor, normal, challenges that they face on day-to-day basis, like they're going to be just flaky adults and unable to handle any difficulty or challenge. Or, it's threatening to think about like the outcome of that type of parenting. If we do that over and over again and not allow our children to experience their life, their emotions, their breakups, their failures fully. And again, it doesn't mean we neglect them and say, well, that's yours, buddy, or, which is a tough thing, right? It's tricky, a lot of parents, I guess, we're professionals. We know this stuff. But a typical parent is like, wait, I don't know where the line is. Like, from one hand, you tell me it's their stuff. Let them work through their emotions. Like, where am I supposed to step in? How am I, it's very challenging. Is there anything you can say about that piece so we can move on to a different topic?
I think that it's one of those things. I mean, I did all these little micro meditations at the end of each chapter for this reason of just like, we've got to practice. It's no easy task. Like, it's easy to talk about, but it's very hard to do. And I think the key is you just practice. It's a practice like any other exercise. You get better at it with practice every day. And the other thing is to remember, you only have to get this kind of right, in quotes, more often than not. So it doesn't need to be that you're always this like conscious, mindful, attentive, present person. It just means that you're making a good effort and that more often than not, you're able to take those moments. And because I do think once you do that, because we have stripped kids, I mean, we care very much about achievement and we care very much about all the like accomplishments that they have and the hard work they might do with school or extracurricular. But in emphasizing that, we like de-emphasize the skills that they need to just function and be people in this world who experience challenges and can keep going. So I think that's also another exercise for us is like, what really matters to me as this in this family? And it's going to be different for everybody, but what are your values? And figure out what those are. And then make sure that you're emphasizing what you're aligned with.
Yeah, one of the recent episodes of my podcast is uncovering your core values. So we're aligned in that. People can, if they haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend. So you talk about limits and rules being different.
I'm sort of saying, well, rules sort of are the umbrella for boundaries and limits. They're kind of separate in that boundary, as you mentioned, is sort of like about separating us from other and what makes, what limits we set for our kids' behavior is separate from the boundaries that we have. And it's just boundaries are important to distinguish because that's what makes sure that our kids know we are not them and they are not us, because it's easy to forget. And then limits are more about like, look, you are a member of society, whether it's the tiny one in our home or the larger one in school or the larger one in your city, state, whatever in the world. And so we don't just get to do what we feel like. There are certain things that we have to do. And also there are certain things that keep you safe that you don't want to do or know to do. So those are limits and expectations, and they should be appropriate for age and your child's temperament, but we can't not have them because it's not safe and it doesn't feel good to not have, like for a growing person, not to have the security of knowing that there are certain barriers, that they don't just have like the freedom of doing whatever, whenever. That doesn't feel safe. It actually promotes a lot of anxiety. And I understand it's hard to have rules because sometimes kids don't like them. And so it's like, oh wait, are we in a good relationship if that's happening? So it's just, again, a matter of like, what's important to you? What rules really matter? And the ones that don't, or you don't have a good reason, just scrap them. But the ones that do matter, set consistently and clearly, and it's much easier.
Yeah, we talk about repair, which is very important, more important than the conflict in a relationship, right? What do you think are blocks for parents to embracing the notion of repair?
I think a couple of blocks happen more often. One is that sometimes parents feel like it undermines their authority to make repair, or they feel like now the rule will be, like I'm giving an excuse to the kids by making these repairs. But I think repairs have to be like reconnecting after a time of discord. And that has nothing to do with the rules. It's just like, look, I don't love that I just yelled at you. It's not, I don't love that I just yelled at you, but if you had done what I said, I wouldn't have had to. They're separate things. So I recognize that I'm just giving an example. Like I flew off the handle. I don't like how I reacted. I'm really sorry and I love you is quite different than, and I think you should break the rules all the time. So I think we just have to realize that we can make repairs without undermining what we're expecting of our kids. And we're modeling for them they can make repairs and that mistakes are just part of the deal. And most importantly, that relationships are so strong that they can afford to have the disconnect because we always come back. And that helps them going forward. They grow up, they have discord in a relationship and they don't worry that it's a 5-alarm fire.
So it makes the parent feel like if I'm repairing, therefore I'm a weak parent. This is like this false idea. Or if I repair, that means I lose my authority as a parent. There was a question once, I really, very thoughtful. This one of the listeners said, yeah, I embrace the idea of repair and I agree that I need to repair. But I keep making the same mistake over and over again as a parent. Like I keep yelling and I don't want to yell. And every time I repair, I feel not great inside.
Because it's going to happen again.
Yes. And she sort of doesn't see the value of repair if she's still going to make the same mistake. And she's worried what's the message that my child is receiving based on this pattern? I'm wondering if you can reflect on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all secretly worry about that because, we all typically make mistakes multiple times, not once. And so I think it's just naming it. Like when you can name those things for your kids, look, I'm working on this and I'm a work in progress just like you are. And that's why people constantly grow. And here's what I'm actively doing to take steps to do better. And I know I'm going to screw up again. And I always love you. And it's not a you problem, it's a me problem. We all have our challenges that we're working on. But I think if you have this voice of self-compassion and not berating yourself because you're always screwing up, your kids will be able to have that same voice in their head. So I actually think it's really helpful for them to hear.
What if the child says, yeah, mommy, you always say that you're working on it. I don't see any progress. You keep yelling at me every time I get a bad grade or I don't listen or whatever, right? What if the child makes a comment like that?
I think receive it. I think you say like, thank you for feeling safe enough to say that. I need to think about it. I need to do better versus like trying to convince them out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alyssa, this is great. I really enjoyed talking with you about the 5 principles of parenting. And of course, we can talk more and more, and there's always new examples. But I really am walking away with the passcode for the alarm visual and that example. It's so relatable and just brilliant. It will stay with me. So thank you for being a wonderful guest and sharing some of your insights. Thank you for writing the book. Congratulations. And it was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure, and I so appreciate it. And I'm glad that was relatable.